Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas. Good morning, Senator. Welcome.
Good morning, Hugh. Good to be back on with you.
I played a great deal of your exchange with Margaret Brennan from the weekend, just like I did the week before with John Karl. Let's start with an open question. Has Joe Biden imposed an arms embargo on Israel?
Hugh, I think it's totally reasonable to say that Joe Biden's imposed a de facto arms embargo on Israel. Last week, he announced on CNN that he would no longer provide offensive weapons. That's a vast category of weapons that Israel used not only in Rafah and Gaza, but to defend itself against the very rocket and missile attacks that are still threatening Israeli lives, and for that matter, lives in Gaza, and shutting down aid crossings. Now, I know Tony Blinken on Margaret Brennan's show before me said, well, it's only this category of large bombs. But Tony Blinken said on that exact same show 2 years ago that the United States would be fine for Ukraine to receive fighter jets, only to have Joe Biden reverse them the very next day. And furthermore, there's a reason why Israel needs those large bombs. That's because for 17 years, the civilized world gave Hamas billions of dollars to build schools and homes and hospitals, and instead they built deep buried tunnels, which is where their leaders and hostages are now. So even if it's only a category of large bombs, it's a significant limitation on what Israel needs. And Hugh, just remember, the Biden administration let an arms embargo on Iran lapse just a few months ago. That's how upended American policy is in the Middle East.
No, I agree with you. I don't even think there's a close call. It's clearly an arms embargo. The president himself added ammunition to that when pressed by Aaron Burnett gently. But I don't understand, and this goes to the heart of my question, Margaret Brennan argued with you rather than interviewed. John Karl argued with you. It's like they're part of the Biden defense team because the president is infirm and cannot appear on the Sunday show. Do you get that sense?
Well, they're not much more persuasive than Joe Biden or all of his mouthpieces coming out of the White House, I can tell you that. In part, Hugh, because it is an indefensible policy in which the president and the Democratic Party has tied itself in knots, trying to balance the growing pro-Hamas wing of its own party and the very large pro-Israel American majority. And again, you saw it play out just last week, Hugh. On Wednesday, Joe Biden announces an arms embargo, presumably because Israel is committing some kind of terrible war crimes in Gaza. And on Friday night, after news deadlines have ended and people have gone home, they release a report that acknowledges they have no evidence of misconduct by the Israeli Defense Forces. Yet they still try to say, well, it's reasonable to assess, a phrase that Tony Blinken used 5 times over the weekend, reasonable to assess that Israel might have, which again is a way of saying there's no evidence for what Joe Biden did. This is, again, turning themselves into a pretzel to try to appease the pro-Hamas wing of their party while not offending the pro-Israel majority of Americans.
Now, Senator Cotton, I don't know if you listen to or read commentary on a regular basis. John Podhorz, editor-in-chief, writes this morning at Commentary, ask yourself, might there be something irresistibly seductive for the Biden team and Biden himself in the idea that his electoral woes have a foreign root? Doesn't the disorder and crisis in and around Israel provide a convenient scapegoat for his own failings? No, it's not the inflation that has eaten away at the ordinary American's financial gain. It's not that Biden now needs his staff to stand between him and photographers to obscure video images of his halting gait. It's not that he sounds like his throat is coated in sandpaper and that his tongue lolls about in his mouth when he speaks. No, it's that damn Bibi that's threatening to drag him down. What do you make of the Podhorz argument, Senator?
Well, I think there may be some truth to what John Podhorz writes, Hugh. Look, Joe Biden has always been a vain, prickly, insecure man. You had a phrase last week. I forget what it was. I think you borrowed it from Clark.
Irritable vanity. I borrowed from Christine Rosen on the Commentary podcast.
So, irritable vanity is a good characterization of that. Ever since he was in the Senate, he had a chip on his shoulder around senators who rose faster, had better political skills than did he. Like the senators who outlasted the 1988 presidential election, like Bill Clinton, like John Kerry, for that matter, like the president he served, Barack Obama. And I do think if you look at the smoking ruins of Joe Biden's presidency, and he's always complaining that the polls don't reflect what a great president he is, that there probably is a temptation for him and those closest to him to blame this all on Benjamin Netanyahu and those pesky Israelis. But the reality is, Hugh, Joe Biden's polls were terrible before Hamas committed the October 7th atrocity. They have remained terrible. Joe Biden is unpopular in places like Michigan, not because of Benjamin Netanyahu, but because his own policies have failed. People can't afford to buy groceries. They can't afford gas or their rent. The situation at our border is a total disaster, and America is completely disrespected around the world, not just in the Middle East, but everywhere. These are the reasons that Joe Biden is failing, and the American people are going to evict him from the White House this fall.
The Washington Post ran a story last week that, if it is true, is outrageous, and that the Post usually has good sources telling them, they always have good sources telling them things, that the United States is offering up intel on where Sinwar is if Israel agrees to stop the Rafah invasion. Israel's not going to do that, but can you believe, I mean, isn't that insane that we would know where Sinwar is and didn't tell the Israelis?
Well, this is the galaxy brains behind Joe Biden's failed policies. I guess they thought that they were showing how shrewd and clever they were by leaking that to the Washington Post, the Democratic Party's official message board. But of course, if you think about it for a moment's notice, what they're acknowledging, admitting, confessing, is that they're withholding vital intelligence from Israel that could help them not only in this war by killing Sinwar, but also certainly reveals the location of hostages, because Sinwar is surrounding himself with high-value hostages, to include potentially American hostages. So not only is it a deeply misguided policy, it goes to show the political stupidity behind this administration's thinking that they would leak that to the Washington Post, believing it made them look good and smart and clever.
Senator Cotton, the New York Times Siena poll is just the worst news I've ever seen for an incumbent president, and that goes back a way because I'm 68. I've never seen a Democrat down 12 points in Nevada. Speculation is that the Latino vote has turned against him. He's also lost a large number of African Americans. Why has the Latino vote turned against Joe Biden? Why are African Americans going to Donald Trump?
Well, again, Hugh, as we talked about with Michigan earlier, it's the same reasons that most Americans have turned against Joe Biden. In Nevada, it's very hard for a cocktail waitress or a construction worker on the Strip to make ends meet, much harder than it was under Donald Trump when jobs were abundant and prices were stable. Furthermore, if you look among Latino voters, especially first-generation immigrants, many of them are appalled by the situation at our border, because if they're voting, they are by definition citizens. They played by the rules. They came to our country legally. They waited in line. They did the work necessary to become an American citizen. And they see this slow-motion invasion of people, not just from Latin America, but literally all over the world. So I think that issue also especially resonates with the great patriotic immigrants who are going to help put Joe Biden out on the streets and Donald Trump back in the White House.
Last question, Senator Cotton. Dwayne, the producer Dwayne, the terrible umpire, but a great producer, and John Campbell, your friend from Congress in the old days, they do a podcast called Look Through the Chaos. John Campbell doesn't want you to do these Sunday shows. He doesn't want any Republican to do these Sunday shows. You go in there and carve up the host. He doesn't care if you carve up the host. He doesn't want any Republican to do the shows. Now, you know the former president likes people to do the shows. Why do you do the shows when you know it's rollerball? It's just completely going to be a Joe Biden surrogate talking to you.
Well, Hugh, there's no question that the Sunday morning news shows are not as influential in making public opinion, and especially elite opinion in Washington, New York, as they once were, when Tim Russert and David Brinkley were in those chairs. But they still have some outsized influence among policymakers and reporters and opinion makers in Washington and New York. And I do think it's important that we not entirely cede that ground to the Democrats, that we need people who are willing to go on Sunday morning shows or willing to go on the evening news shows or even CNN to explain to the swing voters who still watch those channels why all of the things they see around them is Joe Biden's fault. Why Joe Biden is responsible for high grocery prices and gas prices, or the prices at our border, or their crime in their communities, or Uncle Sam wearing a kick me sign around the world. We don't want to cede that entirely to Democrats. I take John Campbell's point. It's not the highlight of my job, but I do think it's important for the president and for our party and for helping shape American public opinion in a way that elects a Republican majority this fall.
Senator Tom Cotton, thank you for joining me. Have a good one. I appreciate it. Don't go anywhere, America. I'll be right back on the Hugh Hewitt Show.